celebrate the holidays, Michael Kennedy just wanted to be with his family in Aspen, nursing his wounds, relaxing, maybe have a few laughs, not worry about the media, its coverage either of John's editorial or of his own unfortunate exploits. With his mother, Ethel, back at the restaurant sipping cocoa and nursing a hurt shoulder from a tumble she had taken earlier in the day, he and his family members went noisily up to the slope and then divided themselves into two teams, Michael, the captain of one, and his sister Rory leading the other. Apparently the stakes were high. On the previous day, the score had been tied between the two teams. "We'll play tomorrow," one of the Kennedys had proclaimed, and death to the loser. And I will pause again. Since we're talking about JFK Jr., have you been watching the new Ryan Murphy biopic series about JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette called American Love Story on FX and Hulu? It's actually surprisingly good. I've been following it. Hope you have too. And there's a lot of renewed interest now in JFK Jr., probably because of that Ryan Murphy series. But if you're interested in the truth about his life, because Ryan Murphy did take a lot of liberties with that story, maybe you'd like to learn more, like to know the truth. JFK Jr. was actually a personal friend of mine for 8 years back in the 90s, up until his death. And I recently produced a biography podcast series about John that I wrote and produced. And I just wanted to share the story of his life with people. So if you're interested to know about that, I'll pop a link, a playlist link to that series. It's called JFK Jr., The Man Behind the Myth. And I will put a link to that down in the comments for you. Hopefully you'll check that out if you're curious. Oh my God, not again. It was on this December 31st, 1997, at about 4 in the afternoon that a dangerous game of ski football was underway. At lightning speed, Michael Kennedy, who was once described by former U.S. Olympic ski coach Bob Betty as the best natural skier he'd ever seen, set off down the mountain with his camera in one hand and a football in the other. "Photo op," he yelled as he took photos of the others while skiing backwards. Wearing a bright copper ski suit and no helmet or any other kind of protection, he was followed down the slope by his son, Michael Jr., 15, and daughters Kyle, 13, and Rory Jr., 10. R. Curry Hay, a publicist, reporter, and friend of the Kennedys who had often skied those slopes with them, was present on that December day and recalled the events. "I didn't play," he remembered. "Though I am a good skier, the idea of whooshing down Aspen Mountain playing football was beyond my athletic capabilities, and to tell you the truth, beyond my imagination too. But they were such daredevils, the Kennedys, and I wanted to be part of the fun because I was a friend of Michael's, so I said, I'll carry the poles, and that's what I did. I carried Michael's ski poles. After the first goal, which was made by Rory, Michael got serious about the game and gave the camera to a friend so he could concentrate on it. "Michael, Michael," someone called as the football sailed his way. Michael turned around to get the pass and he caught it. But in doing so, a terrible thing happened. He veered off the trail in his determination to catch the pass and slammed into a massive spruce tree. It was awful. His skis hit the tree first, then his head hit, and he just crumpled like a rag doll and fell backward onto his back. The crash was as loud as a head-on collision of cars. It was traumatic to witness. I was about 20 feet away, and I got to him as fast as I could, but I knew the truth immediately. I knew he was dead. Blood was pouring from his nose. His face had gone completely white. There was chaos as frantic Kennedys descended upon Michael from every direction. Rory kicked off her skis and ran over to her brother. Trying her best to stay calm, she went to work on him. "There's no pulse," she screamed out. "There's no pulse. Somebody's Call the ski patrol." She then laid Michael on his back, pried his bloody mouth open with her fingers, and began giving him mouth to mouth. Counting off 1, 2, 3, 4, she breathed into his mouth and pounded on his chest, trying to get his heart moving again. "I've got a pulse," Rory exclaimed. She then turned Michael on his side as he began to once again breathe in order that he not choke. There was a fleeting moment of disbelief and exhilaration when it seemed as if Michael was going to be okay. Exhausted, Rory dug her hand into the snow and wiped her face with it before spitting Michael's blood from her mouth. She leaned in close to him. "Michael," she said to her brother through her tears, "now is the time to fight. Don't leave us," she begged him. "Do not leave us, Michael, please, please." Meanwhile, each of Michael's 3 crying children made the sign of the cross and fell to their knees. No one told them to do so. It just somehow came naturally to them, as if by instinct. As they kneeled in the snow and prayed, our Kuri Hay recalled, their prayers were interrupted with their cries of, "Please, God, not my daddy, not my daddy." "Our Father who art in heaven," they began to pray, and they continued to pray and weep, along with all of the others present, until the paramedics arrived and began working on Michael. Finally, Rory gathered up the children and told them to think good thoughts as the paramedics fit Michael with a cervical collar and put him into a toboggan, covering him with a yellow blanket. "Let's go pray for Daddy," she told them through her tears. "When I came upon him, it didn't look like he was aware of anything," says Davis Factor, an LA photographer who was skiing that day and stopped to help. "I don't think this guy knew what hit him." At this point, I started to back away from the scene because I realized that this was an intensely personal and tragic family moment, recalled R. Corey Hay. As the toboggan took Michael down the slope, I took the poles and slowly skied behind the toboggan. It was eerie, unbelievably sad. Michael Kennedy was dead by the time they got him to the hospital. The official cause of death listed as massive head and neck trauma. In an instant, another Kennedy life was over. It was impossible to reconcile. "Oh my God, not again," Ethel Kennedy cried in the hall outside of the emergency room as she fell into her daughter Rory's arms. Of course, there was a great deal of media coverage about the latest Kennedy family tragedy, much of it focusing on what was perceived by many critics as Michael Kennedy's reckless behavior, suggesting a kind of hubris that makes the family feel somehow invincible. It's actually a reductive and simplified way of looking at them. Yes, they are a big family that enjoys adventure, which obviously puts them in danger from time to time. It could be said that their passion for sports runs a close second to their passion for politics. However, much of the press about Michael's death suggested that he was just the latest Kennedy killed while engaging in some sort of sporting activity, as opposed to the truth, which is that he was actually the first. As for real risk-taking, of course, most of the family will admit to a certain amount of it, but not so much in terms of their participation in sports as in what they have done as public servants. An explicit or implied understanding that a life lived with such risk is inexcusable and unjustified, noted Brother Max Kennedy. "It is true that my father took risks, but it is also true that nothing can ever be achieved without risk." In a book on the literature of ancient Greece, he underlined a sentence that read, "Life for him was an adventure, perilous indeed, but men are not made for safe havens." When Max Kennedy and most of his other family members think of risk-taking, they think of his father exploring the bottom of a communist-controlled mining operation in Santiago, Chile, in order to get a better understanding of the dangers faced by people working there, or traveling to South Africa during a time in the 1960s when apartheid was simply unheard of by most Americans, or going to the Mississippi Delta to assist in aiding starving children, or meeting with gang members after the Watts riots, or prosecuting some of the world's most notorious mobsters. But sports activities? While risky, they don't necessarily rise to the standard any Kennedys would consider particularly perilous. Maybe a more accurate explanation, although it too is weak, can be found in the notion of the so-called Kennedy curse, which encompasses all of the tragedies the family has suffered, something Sergeant Shriver once dismissed by saying, "So be it." The Kennedy curse is what screamed out of Newsweek's cover, with a photo of Michael and a headline that read, "Another reckless life and tragic death." As to whether or not Michael's death was the result of carelessness, maybe that was a different story. But even there, one would find some debate. One witness to the accident, an experienced skier named Ted Wyden, recalled, "I felt they were asking for trouble. I like having a distance of about 25 to 50 feet around me when I ski," he said. "And these people, some of them were skiing at an arm's distance from each other. It was just way too close. They were cutting each other off and barely missing each other on their way down. I remember thinking they were playing a very dangerous game. I didn't know they were Kennedys, by the way. I just knew they were a rowdy group of people playing a crazy game. And by the way, never in my life had I ever heard of playing football on skis. I told the friends I was with, look, let's just stay as far away from those people as possible." Just as my group was getting ready to move down the side, down the hill comes one of the guys from that group, full steam ahead and just barely missing one of my friends. And he sailed right by us without a care in the world. I waved my fist at him and screamed out, "Hey, come on, slow down." Some of Michael's friends rose to his defense when magazines quoted witnesses as saying they thought the Kennedys had been out of control. One friend, Blake Fleetwood, a very close friend of RFK Jr.'s, wrote a letter to Time magazine in response to its reporting of the accident, saying in part, quote, "Michael was the best all-terrain skier I've ever seen. He was skiing at a moderate speed on a well-lit and well-groomed intermediate slope, playing a game with his children, something many of us have done without incident for nearly 20 years. Like all sports, including ski racing and ski jumping, ski football has an inherent risk. But Michael's death was far from reckless. It was just a tragic accident." Michael's older brother, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., was particularly upset with R. Corey Hay, who contacted the New York Daily News and the National Enquirer immediately after the accident, before Michael had even arrived at the hospital, to file a first-hand witness report with the press. "Look, I want you to stop giving interviews about what happened to my brother," Bobby Kennedy told Hay in a very heated telephone call about a week after the accident. "You're betraying your friendship with Michael, with me, with all of us," he said. "What the hell is wrong with you, Corey?" "I'm just telling the truth, Bobby," Hay explained. "But you quote Michael as having said, 'We'll play tomorrow, death to the loser.'" "Well, he did say that." "I don't give a shit," Bobby countered, according to Hay's recollection of the conversation. "Michael said a lot of things. No one would even know about it if you hadn't blabbed it." "I'm a reporter," Hay said in his defense. "This is my job. You guys can't control the news." "Jesus Christ, don't give me that bullshit," Bobby said, exasperated. "You contacted the press before Michael was even at the hospital. That's terrible, man. Bottom line," Bobby concluded, "is that my mother wants you to knock it off." "But your mother is quoted in Time magazine as having had a conversation with an official at Aspen Ski Corporation asking her to stop the game." "What?" Bobby exclaimed. "That's a lie. My mother never talked to anybody," Bobby said. "All of these stories are ridiculous. Stop talking to the press, dude. I'm serious." "I can't promise that," our Corey Hayes said, holding his ground. "If I can save one life, one limb, one child from being hurt by calling attention to ski safety, I think it's my responsibility to do that." "Fine then," Bobby Kennedy Jr. said, sounding defeated as he hung up the phone. The funeral mass for Michael Kennedy was held at Our Lady of Victory Church in Centerville, a Cape Cod community near Hyannisport. It was the same church in which Caroline Kennedy, Sidney Lawford, and Kara Kennedy had all gotten married. The service also included the reading of letters from President Bill Clinton, Coretta Scott King, widow of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela, the president of South Africa. Andy Williams, who began the funeral by singing Ave Maria, later recalled, quote, "I don't know what it was about this Mass, but this one was so hard. Maybe it was because some of us old-timers were just getting older, and this kind of thing involving the younger generation was just so hard. In fact, I think that was probably it. You get to a point where it just becomes too much, and I think that's how we were all feeling that day. I barely got through the song, I have to say. I was standing up there looking out at Ethel, and it was incredibly difficult. Certainly no sight could have been more heartbreaking than that of 14-year-old Michael Kennedy Jr. struggling to hold up the front of his father's coffin after the Mass, and then breaking down into racking sobs after the casket was loaded back onto the hearse. I just remember John F. Kennedy Jr. holding Michael Jr. in his arms with all of his might, said Gary Andover, another family friend who was at the funeral. Though Michael's brothers were feeling somewhat better by the time everyone got to Holyhood Cemetery in Brookline, there was no avoiding the overwhelming sadness of seeing the mahogany coffin that held Michael's body ready to be lowered into the cold ground. Michael was to be buried with his favorite football and a medallion that marked 3 years of sobriety for him. Everyone was in such absolute shock and feeling such tremendous grief, you couldn't even speak, said football star Brian Holloway, a friend of the family's who attended the services. With him was his daughter Carrie, named after Carrie Kennedy, who was also her godmother. "We just put our arms around each other because there weren't any words," he said. "I was standing right next to John Jr. at the family plot where David Kennedy was also buried. John and I looked at each other and nodded sadly, and then I put my arm around his shoulder. He did the same to me, put his arm around mine, and we just stood there in disbelief that this terrible thing had happened to someone so young and so athletic and so full of life as Michael. I went over to John, who was standing with Carolyn Bissett," Gary Andover recalled. Carolyn had her hair pulled severely back from her face into a little bun with just light makeup on. Her eyes were very, very red. She looked bereft and incredibly thin, though my memory of her was also that she moved with such grace and that she somehow reminded me of Jackie. Both she and John were dressed in black. They seemed devastated. 2 weeks later, I saw photographs of them from this awful day in some ridiculous tabloid being used to illustrate how unhappy they were in their marriage, which was most certainly not what was going on that day. "I'm so very sorry that your family has to go through this again," Andover told John as the three of them walked away from the cemetery, Carolyn at John's side. "I know," John said. "It sure seems unfair, doesn't it? I'm really worried about my Aunt Ethel. I gotta tell you, she doesn't look good to me right now." Gary agreed and put his arm around John's shoulder as they continued walking. "You know," John said, his voice sounding very weary, They say the Lord doesn't give you any more than what you can handle. Yep, that's what they say, all right, Gary agreed. John stopped walking. Then, with a small, weak smile, he gazed up at a gray winter's Cape Cod sky and said, "Okay, Lord, the Kennedys have had enough now, thank you."